The story begins in the quiet corridors of the U.S. Navy's Experimental Armament Division, a place where ideas could either revolutionize naval warfare or vanish into bureaucratic obscurity, and on one humid summer morning, a small team of engineers wheeled in a device that would shake the foundations of conventional weaponry, a weapon so powerful, so radically designed, that it made the existing arsenal look like child's play. And yet, paradoxically, it would also be rejected by the very institution tasked with defending the nation. The weapon, compact yet terrifying in its potential, promised lethality 16 times greater than any torpedo or naval gun deployed at the time. A quiet horror distilled into steel and circuitry, with the ability to change the calculus of naval engagement entirely, to allow a single ship or even a small squadron to strike with devastating precision and unmatched efficiency, effectively rendering entire flotillas vulnerable in ways that the Navy, steeped in tradition and cautious in doctrine, could not yet comprehend, and so it sat on the gleaming test table, polished to a blinding sheen under the harsh fluorescent lights, humming faintly as if aware of the destiny it carried, drawing in the engineers and officers with the magnetic pull of curiosity and fear. Captain James Holloway, a seasoned tactician with salt and iron hair, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he examined the device, noting the intricate balance of gyroscopes, explosive chambers, and the delicate wiring that connected each component, each piece seemingly whispering secrets of destruction, the sort of secrets that could make or break wars. And yet, in the room, the hum of the test equipment mingled with the tension, the sweat on brows and the distant echo of the Navy Yard outside, all conspiring to create a moment that felt suspended between triumph and tragedy, as if history itself had paused to take notice, and Holloway's fingers traced the polished casing, imagining the lives it could end, the fleets it could incapacitate, the courage it would demand from those who dared deploy it, and the hesitation it would evoke in leaders too cautious to embrace its radical potential. For days, the weapon underwent rigorous trials, each test meticulously recorded, every movement measured with precision instruments, every detonation observed with high-speed cameras, and each result cataloged in volumes that would later be studied by historians, engineers, and strategists alike. Because what unfolded during those trials was a revelation. A single deployment could alter naval engagements completely, enabling even a lightly armed vessel to strike with the force of a battleship, allowing coordinated strikes that could obliterate enemy formations before they even realized the danger. And yet, amidst the awe, a palpable tension grew within the Navy's upper echelons, because the implications of such power were staggering, ethically and strategically, challenging doctrines, challenging careers, challenging the very conception of naval dominance. And the debates that followed in the smoke-filled briefing rooms were fierce, heated, philosophical, and occasionally bitter, with seasoned admirals arguing that human error, miscalculation, and the risks of an accidental detonation could outweigh any tactical advantage, while the younger officers, often with less experience but more daring in imagination, pleaded for adoption, envisioning the annihilation of enemy convoys with minimal risk to their own sailors, the discussion stretching for hours, sometimes days, until the corridors themselves seemed to vibrate with the tension of an impending decision. A decision that could define the Navy's legacy for decades. Yet despite the clarity of its destructive potential, the weapon was ultimately sidelined, classified, and locked away, deemed too revolutionary, too volatile, too dangerous for the cautious culture of the time, and it was in that rejection that a paradox was born. A device that could have saved countless lives by shortening wars, preventing attrition, and striking decisively was instead buried in secrecy, a ghost of innovation, its lethal promise confined to reports, diagrams, and the memories of the engineers who had witnessed its raw power. And these men, even years later, would speak of it with awe and sorrow, knowing that in the hands of tradition, genius could be restrained, brilliance could be neglected, and history could turn without ever realizing the potential that had once shimmered so vividly in the hands of a few bold visionaries. The narrative of this weapon, the story of its design, testing, and rejection, is not merely about steel, explosives, or mechanics, but about human ambition, fear, and the paradoxical nature of institutional caution. And it is this tension between unimaginable power and prudent restraint that forms the spine of the tale, the heartbeat that carries viewers through the suspense, the awe and the ultimate tragedy of brilliance deferred. The weapon's prototype, once capable of obliterating fleets, now sat in a shadowed hangar surrounded by dust, the hum of its dormant gyroscopes faint. Almost mournful, while outside, the Navy continued its routines, unaware that a single silent innovation, 16 times deadlier than their standard arsenal, could have rewritten naval history, could have ended conflicts swiftly, decisively, and at minimal cost. Yet instead remained a hidden specter, a lesson in the perils of fear over vision, a testament to what happens when caution outpaces courage. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the hangar, the faint glint of polished steel whispered a haunting truth, that sometimes the most powerful tools are those we refuse to wield. And in that refusal, history moves on, blind to the paths that might have been, leaving only speculation, regret, and the cold, enduring brilliance of a weapon that might have changed everything. The following morning, the Navy's experimental team returned to the hangar, tension hanging in the air like static electricity, the smell of oil and steel mingling with the faint, lingering scent of gunpowder from the previous day's trials, and the prototype weapon, now carefully placed on reinforced supports, seemed almost alive, as if aware of the attention it drew and the destiny it carried, its sleek casing gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting every anxious face around it. And for the engineers, it was not just a machine, it was a question, a challenge, a moral test of ambition versus caution. Because what they were about to witness could either justify their sleepless nights and meticulous calculations or confirm the fears that had already begun to take root among the higher echelons of command. Captain Holloway, who had spent decades navigating the delicate balance between innovation and operational safety, approached the device once more, his fingers brushing the polished steel lightly, feeling the vibrations of its internal mechanisms, subtle yet ominous. The hum almost like a heartbeat that matched his own, steady but tense. And as the team prepared to conduct another series of tests, this time simulating real naval engagement scenarios, the stakes could not have been higher. For the Navy had authorized only a partial trial, wary of what the weapon's full potential could unleash, and the room was filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the clinking of tools and the shuffling of papers, the engineers exchanging glances, each aware that the outcome of these trials might determine whether the United States would embrace a radical shift in naval warfare or consign one of the deadliest innovations of the era to obscurity. The first test began with the careful calibration of targeting systems. The device mounted on a rail simulating a ship's deck, its guidance mechanisms meticulously aligned, while engineers monitored pressure, recoil, and detonation sensitivity, every reading projected onto large screens, numbers streaming in rapid succession. Their patterns analyzed, reanalyzed, and then analyzed again, because even the slightest anomaly could spell disaster, and the Navy's fear was not just of mechanical failure, but of strategic, ethical, and psychological consequences. A weapon this lethal in the wrong hands could devastate entire fleets, reshape conflicts, and challenge international norms of warfare, a reality the brass were unwilling to confront despite the evidence staring them in the face. As the mechanism fired, a controlled explosion rippled through the testing chamber, sound bouncing off reinforced walls. Yet outside observers could see the raw power, the devastating precision, the way the small device, compact and unassuming, released an energy and force that would have dwarfed the conventional torpedoes in service. At the time, and the test reports began to detail outcomes that were almost unimaginable. Simulated enemy destroyers obliterated with a single deployment, fleets scattered as if caught in a sudden tempest, and tactical maps overlaid with projected damage zones that extended far beyond what any current naval ordnance could achieve. And yet, even as admiration and disbelief spread across the room, there was a profound undercurrent of unease, a whisper of dread that this brilliance might be too much, that it might be better to admire it in the confines of a test chamber than risk unleashing it upon a world already scarred by war. And then came the internal debate, fierce and unrelenting. Among the Navy's officers, Admirals argued that even with rigorous training, the margin for error was infinitesimal. One misfire could turn the weapon against friendly vessels. One miscalculation could spark international outrage or even escalate conflicts beyond control. While the engineers insisted that, with careful implementation, the tactical advantage was unparalleled, capable of ending engagements swiftly, decisively, and with minimal loss of life among U.S. sailors, their voices tinged with frustration at the inertia of bureaucracy, the cautious weight of tradition, the very culture that prized conservative judgment over daring vision. And as these arguments stretched late into the night, the prototype sat silently on its supports, gleaming under the dim light, embodying both the promise of unparalleled power and the curse of rejected genius, a paradox of warfare that challenged the very principles upon which the Navy had been built. Yet even in rejection, the engineers documented every measurement, every outcome, every calculation, knowing that decades later, historians and strategists would study these records and marvel at what had been conceived, what had been tested, and what had ultimately been denied, and there was a quiet, almost sorrowful admiration among the test team, a recognition that the weapon was more than steel and explosive. It was a vision of what could have been, a radical blueprint for naval supremacy that dared to question conventions, challenge doctrine, and redefine engagement strategy. Yet it was confined to hangar shadows, hidden from the fleets that might have carried it into history. A ghost of brilliance, 16 times deadlier than anything deployed, yet untouched, silent, and waiting. And as the final simulated exercise concluded, smoke dissipating from controlled detonations, sensors cooled, and reports were compiled, Holloway and his officers paused, staring at the weapon with a mixture of awe and melancholy. The reality of human caution and institutional hesitancy pressing down upon them like the weight of steel above, and for a fleeting moment, they imagined what could have been. Fleets of American ships empowered by a device so deadly that enemy formations would dissolve before a shot could be fired. Lives spared through precision and deterrence. Wars shortened through unparalleled tactical advantage. And then, almost painfully, they accepted the truth. Brilliance alone is not enough. Vision is not always rewarded, and the Navy, in its careful, deliberate way, had chosen caution over revolutionary power. And in that choice, the weapon, the dreams, the possibilities, and the haunting promise of 16 times the deadliness were consigned to history's shadows, leaving only the hum of dormant gyroscopes, the polished steel reflecting the dim light, and the echoing question of what might have changed if daring had outweighed fear. The next day, the hangar was cloaked in an almost reverent silence, the kind that only comes when men are faced with something far beyond ordinary comprehension. And the weapon, now stationed at the center of the floor, seemed to exude a quiet authority, its polished metal surfaces catching the early morning light like a predator in repose. Waiting, always waiting, and the engineers and officers, gathered around it in hushed groups, felt the weight of its potential pressing upon them, a tangible tension that made every breath deliberate, every movement careful. For they were in the presence of something designed not just to destroy, but to redefine the very nature of naval combat, a device whose operational parameters promised lethality 16 times beyond conventional ordnance, and yet whose acceptance could unravel decades of strategy, protocol, and deeply ingrained doctrine, a paradox that haunted even the most courageous among them. Captain Holloway, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, surveyed the weapon with a mixture of awe and unease, tracing the contours of its intricate mechanisms with his eyes, noting the delicate gyroscopic stabilizers, the precision of the firing chamber, and the elegant yet terrifying simplicity of its explosive vectoring system, imagining how, in the hands of a skilled operator, it could annihilate an enemy fleet in moments, and yet, imagining just as vividly, the catastrophe that could unfold if mishandled. A single miscalculation sending devastation toward allies rather than enemies. And the engineers, younger and brimming with enthusiasm, could barely contain their excitement, whispering among themselves, calculating engagement ranges, targeting efficiencies, and potential tactical maneuvers, while the senior officers, battle-hardened and cautious, weighed the moral, strategic, and political ramifications, debating in hushed but fervent tones whether brilliance must always be tempered by prudence, whether innovation is inherently a gift or a peril when it surpasses the capacity of doctrine to govern it. And as the day stretched on, the team conducted further tests, each one more revealing, more precise, more alarming. Simulating full-scale naval scenarios, the weapon unleashing controlled detonations that demonstrated its extraordinary power, obliterating surrogate targets with a precision and efficiency that was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. And the data streaming from the sensors confirmed every calculation. This was not merely a weapon, it was a paradigm shift, an instrument of potential unmatched in naval history, capable of transforming strategy, shortening wars, and altering the very calculus of survival at sea. Yet it was precisely this clarity of potential that bred the deepest hesitation, for to embrace it would be to rewrite centuries of naval thought. To trust a single device with power so absolute that error was unthinkable, and in the meeting rooms adjacent to the hangar the debates raged, officers arguing that history had taught caution, that no technological marvel could substitute for judgment, that the chain of command and the principles of accountability demanded restraint, while the engineers insisted that progress waits for no one, that victory is often seized by those willing to wield what others fear. And in this clash of vision and caution, the weapon remained a silent judge, reflecting their fears in gleaming steel, its potential both a promise and a threat. The hum of its dormant gyroscopes a reminder that power can exist even without action, waiting for the moment someone dares to release it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the hangar, the prototype was wheeled to a reinforced testing platform for a final demonstration. The atmosphere tense, almost theatrical, as if the world itself had paused to witness the unfolding of a quiet, monumental drama, and as the simulated firing commenced, the controlled explosions illuminated the walls, sending smoke curling into the air, sparks dancing across metal scaffolds, the precision of destruction almost hypnotic in its symmetry. And the observers could see, with painful clarity, that a single operator could, with this device, decimate formations that would otherwise require entire squadrons to challenge. And yet, even as awe mingled with fear, the gravity of its implications weighed heavily upon all present. What is the price of power so absolute? Who decides when it is unleashed? And what is lost when brilliance is shackled by hesitation? The reports compiled that evening were exhaustive. Every parameter, every measurement, every reaction recorded meticulously. Yet the recommendation was unanimous among the cautious leadership. The weapon was too dangerous to be deployed, too radical to be trusted. Its power unparalleled, but its potential consequences unmanageable. And in the quiet aftermath, as the engineers cleaned the testing area and the officers filed out into the night, the prototype remained, gleaming, humming faintly, almost mournfully, a silent testament to the gulf between human ingenuity and human restraint. A ghost of what might have been, a whisper in steel and circuitry of victory deferred, of wars that could have ended sooner, of lives that might have been spared. And as Holloway lingered, staring at the sleek contours of the weapon, he realized the cruel paradox. The more dangerous the device, the more its genius was constrained, and in that quiet hangar, under the dim glow of floodlights, 16 times deadlier. Than the standard arsenal, it waited patiently, untapped, untested in combat, a lesson in the cost of fear over action, and a haunting reminder that sometimes the most powerful tools are those that remain unused, their potential resonating only in the minds of those who witness them, leaving history to speculate, imagine, and mourn the brilliance that could have been. And as the night deepened, the faint hum of gyroscopes and the reflective gleam of steel whispered a chilling truth. Power, when unclaimed, is still a burden, and genius deferred is a shadow that haunts the future. Dawn broke over the sprawling naval testing grounds, the gray light filtering through morning mist and casting a silver sheen across the rows of reinforced steel platforms, each one housing the prototype weapon, its polished surface reflecting the muted light in a way that made it appear alive, almost sentient, and the gathered officers and engineers moved like shadows, their steps careful, their eyes wide with a mixture of reverence and apprehension, for they understood that today's demonstration could forever alter their understanding of naval firepower. the weapon now humming faintly, a low, vibrating warning that it was ready. Capable and waiting, its mechanisms finely tuned, calibrated to exacting tolerances, promising devastation on a scale previously unimagined. And as Captain Holloway approached, notebook in hand, he felt the familiar knot of tension in his chest, the same that had gripped him during the first trials. Yet today the stakes felt exponentially higher, the calculations more critical, the potential consequences more profound, for this was not a mere technical demonstration. It was a reckoning, a confrontation with the very limits of innovation, authority, and human judgment. The engineers methodically ran through pre-flight and pre-firing checks, sensors streaming data to banks of monitors, dials flickering, gauges oscillating, all meticulously logged, each reading scrutinized by multiple eyes, the air thick with anticipation and the faint metallic scent of machinery. And as the countdown commenced, every man present could feel the weight of history pressing down. A tangible pressure that made the sweat bead on brows and the fingers tighten on notebooks and clipboards, the final seconds dragging on with unbearable slowness, each tick of the clock echoing like the heartbeat of the weapon itself. And when the firing sequence was initiated, the controlled explosion sent a shockwave through the reinforced chamber, shivering the steel and sending fine particulate dust into the air. Yet the real spectacle was the demonstration of precision and efficiency. Surrogate targets obliterated with flawless accuracy, simulated enemy formations disintegrating before the eyes of all observers, their placements, shields, and defensive countermeasures rendered meaningless by the weapon's superior targeting algorithms and explosive delivery system. And in that instant, awe and fear collided, the engineers' faces illuminated by the flickering light of detonations, the officers exchanging glances that spoke volumes without words, the unspoken understanding that what lay before them was not simply an advancement of military capability, but a tectonic shift in the very concept of naval warfare. A device whose lethality defied precedent, and yet, even as admiration coursed through their veins, caution anchored their minds, reminding them of the consequences of error, the fragility of human oversight in the face of such overwhelming power. And as Holloway moved closer to examine the impact data, noting the precision of explosive fragmentation patterns and the astonishing consistency across trials, he realized with a chill that this weapon was capable not just of defeating enemy fleets, but of rewriting entire campaigns, collapsing defenses and rendering traditional doctrine obsolete, a thought that sent ripples of both exhilaration and dread through the room. For while strategic advantage was undeniable, the ethical, operational, and political ramifications were equally staggering. Throughout the day, the tests continued, each sequence escalating in complexity, incorporating moving targets, simulated weather variables, and coordinated firing arrays, the data confirming every prediction of destructive capability, the weapon's performance surpassing even the most optimistic projections, demonstrating a lethality 16 times greater than standard naval ordnance. Yet still the Navy's senior leadership hesitated. The weight of responsibility and precedent compelling restraint, the fear of accidents, of political fallout, of catastrophic misuse, dominating their deliberations, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of superiority. And by evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the testing grounds, the weapon sat silently on its platform, gleaming like a dormant god, a monument to what human ingenuity could achieve when unshackled by conventional limitations, yet also a testament to what restraint can impose upon ambition, a paradox as stark and unyielding as the steel that composed it. The final analysis session took place under dimmed lights, officers and engineers poring over charts, logs, and photographs, calculating ranges, blast radii, targeting precision, and theoretical deployment scenarios, yet the unanimous conclusion remained that such power, while a tactical revolution, was too radical, too absolute, and too unpredictable for active service. A decision that left the engineers frustrated, the younger officers disappointed, yet the veterans nodded solemnly, understanding that humanity's capacity for oversight and judgment sometimes outweighs the brilliance of a single invention. And as Holloway stood once more before the weapon, he ran a hand along its smooth surface, feeling the vibrations of latent power beneath his fingertips, sensing the potential not yet realized. Imagining fleets shattered, campaigns shortened, and wars possibly altered by its existence, yet acknowledging that this brilliance, unmatched and unprecedented, would remain constrained, observed but unused, a cautionary tale in both achievement and restraint. And as the hangar doors closed behind the departing personnel, the quiet hum of the weapon lingered, a haunting whisper of what might have been, a ghostly echo of victory deferred, a reminder that innovation, no matter how extraordinary, must always contend with the limits of human courage, foresight, and responsibility. And in that silence, the lesson of the day was clear. Sometimes the most powerful tools are those left dormant, their potential resonating only in the imagination, a monument to genius held in check, a shadow of possibility hovering over history, waiting for the future to decide whether brilliance will ever be unleashed or forever restrained. Night had fallen over the naval testing grounds, the chill air carrying the faint scent of salt from the nearby ocean and the lingering aroma of spent explosives. And the prototype weapon now sat alone on its reinforced platform, bathed in the cold glare of floodlights, its polished steel reflecting streaks of white light like the eyes of a predator observing silently, while inside the hangar the officers and engineers gathered for the final debrief, exhaustion heavy on their shoulders, yet their minds alight with the knowledge of what they had witnessed, the hum of latent energy from the weapon vibrating faintly through the concrete floor. A constant reminder that this was no ordinary device, no simple piece of artillery, but a creation 16 times deadlier than anything currently in the U.S. Navy's arsenal, capable of ending battles before they had begun and reshaping the very calculus of maritime warfare. And as Captain Holloway addressed the assembly, his voice measured yet tinged with awe, he recounted the day's trials, the flawless accuracy, the devastating destruction, the unprecedented power. And every man present felt the weight of history pressing down. The undeniable knowledge that this invention, if deployed, would change everything, yet equally, the knowledge that human prudence must restrain genius lest it consume its own creators. For every simulation had also revealed the razor-thin margin for error, the slightest miscalculation potentially triggering catastrophic consequences, and in those moments of contemplation, the room was heavy with unspoken questions. Who decides when such power is unleashed? And what are the moral consequences of holding such absolute destruction in one's hands? The engineers presented their final reports, detailing every measurement, every trajectory, every calculated blast radius, and the photographs of simulated destruction illuminated the room, showing with terrifying clarity how a single operator could annihilate formations that once required entire fleets to challenge. Yet despite the brilliance and technical perfection, the consensus was unanimous. The weapon was too radical, too dangerous, too absolute, and must remain in reserve, observed, studied, but never deployed, a silent guardian of potential, a monument to both human ingenuity and restraint. And as the officers filed out of the hangar into the night, their boots echoing on the concrete, Holloway lingered, staring at the gleaming device, imagining its lethality across stormy seas, envisioning battles ended before they began, yet understanding the burden of wisdom that required restraint. And in that quiet moment, illuminated by the harsh glare of floodlights and the soft glimmer of moonlight reflecting off polished steel, the prototype seemed almost alive, whispering of power, of choice, of history rewritten or deferred. Its presence a chilling reminder that some inventions are too brilliant, too potent, and too absolute to be trusted to the chaos of war. And as Holloway finally turned away, the low hum of the dormant gyroscope seemed to echo in his mind, a haunting testament to what might have been, a silent witness to the tension between genius and prudence, between potential and restraint. And outside, the night wind carried the faint, ghostly resonance of battles never fought, fleets never destroyed, and a world that had narrowly avoided the consequences of human ambition unbridled, leaving every man who had seen it with the indelible impression that sometimes the greatest power lies not in what is unleashed, but in what is held back, the echo of brilliance contained, a shadow of possibility hovering over history, waiting, patient and silent, for the future to reckon with the might of a weapon 16 times deadlier than all that came before.